was an unassuming Thursday afternoon when Jamal Turner received a call from his 10-year-old daughter, Aaliyah, that would turn his world upside down. Jamal was a single father, a hard-working man who had built his life around providing the best for his daughter. Aaliyah was his pride and joy, a bright, compassionate girl who excelled in school and never shied away from helping others. So when she called him that afternoon with the words, "The bus driver did it again," he immediately felt a pang of concern and confusion. "What do you mean, baby?" Jamal asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "It's Mr. Thompson, Dad. He did it again. He made me sit in the front seat and wouldn't let me go back with my friends," she said, her voice wavering with frustration. Jamal frowned, his mind racing. This wasn't the first time Aaliyah had mentioned that her bus driver, Mr. Thompson, was making her sit apart from the other kids, but he'd assumed it was some kind of school bus policy, or maybe a way of keeping order on the bus. Still, Aaliyah's upset tone made him wonder if there was more to it than he'd thought. "He's done this before?" Jamal asked, his protective instincts kicking in. "Yes, and he doesn't make any of the other kids sit in the front, just me," she replied, her voice growing quieter. "And sometimes he says things, Dad. He says things about me being different." Jamal's heart sank. He felt a surge of anger mixed with helplessness. He had raised Aaliyah to be proud of who she was, never thinking she would face discrimination so close to home, and at such a young age. He couldn't ignore this any longer. With each passing moment, his frustration grew as he realized his daughter might be facing something much darker than he'd initially thought. Without hesitation, Jamal told her, "Listen, baby, stay on the bus until I get there. I'm going to call 911 and I'll be there as soon as I can. Don't worry, I've got this." Within minutes, Jamal was on the phone with 911, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. They assured him that an officer would be sent to meet the school bus as soon as possible. Jamal left his office, heart pounding, as he drove toward the spot where he knew the bus would be dropping off the kids. When he arrived, he could see the bright yellow school bus parked near the curb. A few kids were still milling around, and the familiar figure of Mr. Thompson, a middle-aged white man with a graying beard, was standing by the door, clipboard in hand. Aaliyah stood alone at the front of the bus, clutching her backpack with a somber look on her face. As soon as she saw her father, her eyes lit up and she ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "It's okay, baby. I'm here," Jamal whispered, kissing the top of her head. He could feel her trembling, and that only made his resolve stronger. Within moments, a police car pulled up, and a young officer stepped out, his expression serious. He approached Jamal, introduced himself as Officer Hernandez, and quickly got to the point. "You reported that there's been some potential misconduct by the bus driver?" he asked, glancing over at Mr. Thompson, who was now watching the scene unfold with a look of irritation. Jamal nodded. "Yes, officer. My daughter has been telling me for weeks that this driver has been forcing her to sit at the front of the bus, apart from her friends. Today she mentioned he's also been making comments about her race. I need you to investigate this." Officer Hernandez took a deep breath, turning to Mr. Thompson. "Sir, would you mind explaining why this young girl has been made to sit separately from the other children?" Mr. Thompson shrugged, his face a mix of annoyance and indifference. "I don't see what the big deal is. Some kids just need a little extra supervision, that's all. I'm just doing my job." Officer Hernandez narrowed his eyes. "Extra supervision? And what exactly is your reasoning for selecting this child for that kind of attention?" Mr. Thompson's face reddened slightly. "Well, some kids just don't know how to behave, and it's my job to make sure everyone stays safe." Jamal clenched his fists, but he took a deep breath, trying to keep his cool. "You're saying my daughter doesn't know how to behave? She's one of the top students in her grade. She's never been in trouble a day in her life. Why is she the only one being singled out?" Mr. Thompson's mouth opened and closed, but he didn't seem to have an answer. Officer Hernandez, sensing that something wasn't right, decided to dig deeper. "Mr. Thompson, I think it would be best if we took this conversation to the station. We'll need to get statements from you, the child, and any other relevant witnesses. Let's ensure everything is handled properly." Mr. Thompson scoffed, but he didn't protest. Reluctantly, he followed Officer Hernandez to the squad car, while Jamal and Aaliyah made their way to the station in Jamal's car. As they drove, Jamal took Aaliyah's hand in his. "I'm proud of you for telling me, sweetheart. You don't ever have to put up with anyone making you feel less than you are." Aaliyah nodded, though Jamal could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "Do you think he'll get in trouble, Dad?" Jamal glanced at her, determination in his eyes. "If he's done something wrong, he absolutely will." At the station, Aaliyah sat down with Officer Hernandez and recounted her experiences on the bus. She spoke softly, her voice shaking as she described the things Mr. Thompson had said to her. He'd say stuff like, "People like you need to be kept under control," and he'd make me sit in the front even if I didn't want to. If I asked him why, he'd just tell me it was for my own good, she explained, her small hands twisting in her lap. Officer Hernandez listened carefully, taking notes and nodding. "Aaliyah, thank you for sharing this with us. You've been very brave." Jamal listened, his heart aching for his daughter. He couldn't believe someone entrusted with the care of children could treat a young girl with such disregard and cruelty. Over the next few days, the investigation into Mr. Thompson's behavior deepened. Officer Hernandez reached out to other families whose children rode the same bus, and slowly, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. It turned out that Aaliyah wasn't the only child Mr. Thompson had singled out. 2 other students, both students of color, had also been subjected to his extra supervision and were forced to sit at the front of the bus. When their parents were interviewed, they revealed similar stories. Their children had mentioned feeling uncomfortable around Mr. Thompson, but hadn't spoken up, fearing they'd get in trouble. As the evidence mounted, it became clear that Mr. Thompson's actions were rooted in a bias he had carefully hidden behind the guise of supervision. His treatment of Aaliyah and the other children wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of discriminatory behavior that had gone unchecked for far too long. With the mounting testimonies, Mr. Thompson was formally suspended from his position pending further investigation. The school board became involved, reviewing its policies on hiring and monitoring drivers, and issued a formal apology to Jamal, Aaliyah, and the other families affected. Though Jamal was relieved that Mr. Thompson had been held accountable, he felt there was still work to be done. He couldn't shake the feeling that the system had failed his daughter and other children like her by allowing someone with such discriminatory behavior to have authority over them. Driven by his desire for change, Jamal approached the school board, requesting a review of their training practices for bus drivers and other staff. He argued that sensitivity and diversity training should be mandatory for anyone working with children, ensuring they understood the impact of their words and actions on young minds. To his surprise, the board agreed to his proposal. They invited him to share his perspective at their next meeting, and Jamal poured his heart into a speech, sharing not only Aaliyah's experience, but also his own fears and frustrations as a Black father. His speech resonated with the board members, many of whom hadn't fully grasped the emotional toll such discrimination could have on a family. By the end of the meeting, the board had unanimously voted to implement new diversity training requirements for all staff. They also established a protocol for students to anonymously report any issues they faced on school transportation, giving children a safe way to speak up if they were uncomfortable. Aaliyah returned to school with a renewed sense of confidence, knowing her father had stood up for her, and that her voice had made a difference. She was welcomed back on the bus with open arms by her friends, and a new driver, a kind woman named Ms. Lopez, was assigned to the route. Ms. Lopez greeted each student with a smile and made it clear that everyone was welcome to sit wherever they liked. Over time, the scars left by Mr. Thompson's behavior began to heal, though the experience stayed with Aaliyah. With her father's guidance, she learned to be proud of who she was, refusing to let anyone make her feel inferior. Jamal continued to be a voice for change in the community. He joined a local parents' advocacy group, working to address issues of bias and discrimination in the school system. His work helped create a more inclusive environment for all students, ensuring that his daughter, and children like her, would never have to endure what she had experienced. Months later, Jamal received a handwritten note from the school board thanking him for his advocacy. They credited his efforts with sparking necessary changes within the school district, changes that would have a lasting impact on generations of students to come. For Jamal, the note was a reminder of the strength he had found through his daughter's courage. In standing up for Aaliyah, he had not only protected her, but had helped build a safer, more inclusive environment for every child in Blue Creek. As for Aaliyah, she continued to shine in school, her spirit undiminished. The experience had taught her an important lesson, that her voice mattered, and that she had a father and a community who would always stand behind her. Jamal and Aaliyah's story is a testament to the power of family, courage, and the importance of standing up against injustice. It shows how one parent's determination to protect his child can lead to positive change for an entire community. In the end, their story serves as a reminder that every child deserves to be treated with dignity, respect, and love no matter who they are.